Good morning, British literature scholars. I hope you enjoyed your 3 day weekend. Welcome back. I think you're going to enjoy this week. This is, to me, a fun week because this is going to be a week that we get away from poetry for a little bit and we start getting into a little bit of the history of Europe, really. And we get into the actual essays that were written as arguments. If we were in a face-to-face class in a classroom, I always open this class up, this French Revolution class up with the comment, before there was Fox News and before there was MSNBC, there were pamphlets. And what we mean by that is these pamphlets here were basically the way that people debated. They debated the political issues of the time. So what we're looking at this week is the end of the 18th century, particularly from about 1789 up until about 1795 or somewhere thereabouts, where we look at the French Revolution. Now, you're asking yourself this. This is a British literature class. What does the French Revolution have to do with anything? I get it. The answer is it has everything to do with what was going on in Britain at the end of the 18th century. Because when the French overthrew their king, they overthrew Louis XVI, they beheaded him, and they beheaded his wife, Marie Antoinette, and they got rid of the monarchy and turned into the government that France has now. England was contemplating whether it should do the same thing. Now remember, if you go back into the British literature slideshow that we had a couple weeks ago, King Charles I lost his head because he was not a very good king. And for 11 years, the British did not have a king. They called it the interregnum, which is Latin for between kings. After Oliver Cromwell, who was the guy running Parliament at the time, passed away, they brought the king back. That was King Charles II. They brought him back in 1660. Of course, in 1649 was when King Charles I got executed. So, while all of this chaos is going on in France, people in England are saying, do we need our monarchy too? Do we need a king as well? Is this French Revolution a good thing? Is it good for the people? Or is it a really bad thing? So, as you read this introduction, this Revolution, Controversy, and Spirit of the Age, on pages 183 and 84 of the textbook, think about what's going on here. This is a time of great chaos. It's a time of great turmoil, and the world will never be the same after this. And that includes England. Then we have the debate. We have Brooke, who has decided in his piece, Burke, not Brooke, Edmund Burke, from Reflections on the Revolution in France. He's going to make the argument that we need our king. We don't need any kind of a revolution over here. We don't need to make any changes because the freedoms that France is trying to gain, we already have guaranteed to us by the Magna Carta and by the Glorious Revolution, which was William and Mary. And so he's going to make that argument. Mary Wollstonecraft and Thomas Paine are going to take him to task for that. And the way they respond to him is really going to look like something off of Fox News or look like something off of MSNBC. They're going to have a very hostile reaction against Burke. And they are going to basically clean his clock and say, hey, wait a minute. These issues that are going on in France are very important issues, and we need to discuss them here in England as well. Because do we really need our king, or can we solve these issues with him? So, this debate is just too important to ignore. That's why we're spending this week on it. So, answer the questions on the discussion board about that. Pay attention to the point that Burke will make and then the counterpoint that Wollstonecraft will make. Or the point that Burke will make and the counterpoint that Paine will make. Because Wollstonecraft and Paine will attack two different parts of his argument. But they both felt like they were correct. So pamphlets are extremely important in Europe, essentially. And one of the big reasons, and I think I mentioned this with Romanticism last week, but I'll go ahead and mention it again. One of the big reasons is because um, people in Europe were finally beginning to know how to read and write. And once they start to read and write, the establishment, the kings, the church, in fact, a lot of what the people in France were rebelling against was the church of the Catholic Church as well. So they were trying to overthrow both the church and the king. Um, the churches and the royalty were terrified because if the poor people that had been repressed for hundreds of years suddenly figured out the advantages that royalty and church had over them and how wrong some of those advantages were, the people might rebel. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened in France. The people rebelled because they were tired of being stepped on by their king and by their churches. And it would be a very bloody time. They ended up having something called a reign of terror, where people were getting beheaded by the guillotine by the hundreds on a daily basis. In fact, Maximilian Robespierre will actually lead that beheading party up until the point where, guess what? He got beheaded as well. Irony of ironies, right? So, pay attention to all of that. I have your postings. Not everybody's done them all, but I will have those graded hopefully by the end of today. And by today, I mean on Tuesday. So it's very important you don't fall behind on these postings. And it's very important you take these postings seriously because these postings are going to be the basis for your research paper. So make sure that you don't blow these off. And I'll talk more about what I found right with them and what I found wrong with them probably in next week's video. So that's really all I have for today. I think you're going to enjoy this week's. If you love a good debate, or if you're one of those reality TV show junkies, or you're a Fox News or an MSNBC junkie, you're really going to love this week's class because the drama that occurred in Europe and in England as well as in France at this time, whew, I don't think we've seen anything like that in our lifetimes. And so we're starting to see some pretty violent times with Ferguson, Missouri, and with New York City, and with all the other, particularly in racial tensions, which is kind of fitting for Martin Luther King holiday as of yesterday. But man, we're not seeing anything in the United States like what we saw in Europe and what we saw in France, particularly at this time. So I think you're really going to enjoy this week's lessons. I know this is one of my favorite weeks of the semester. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me, drop by my office during my office hours, which are posted on the syllabus, or give me a phone call if you need to. And I should have those postings graded very soon. And have a good week.